For all people's excitement about artificial intelligence and what it can do, synthetic biology is one of the best weapons we have.
When modification of an embryo was performed, there was an outcry in the scientific community and illegal in most countries.
So, Sam, when you're talking about de-extinction, what do you mean?
It's woolly mammoth with an asterisk.
If we can bring species back, then why should we bother about extinction now?
We have serious climate issues, so it's hugely beneficial to bring back woolly mammoths, tromping down the permafrost.
How do we ensure that humanity benefits?
I'm very excited about where the world could be in terms of cancer in 10 years' time.
This rather goes down the line of an ableist approach.
Biotech will always make a lot of money because people want to stay alive.
It sounds as if you're starting to create a super race. Welcome back to Premier Unbelievable. I'm Roger Bolton, and this week we're exploring one of the most challenging and exciting areas of modern science, genetic engineering. With the rise of technologies like CRISPR, we'll explain what that is later, we now have the ability to edit the very DNA of living organisms, from crops to humans. But this power raises deep ethical questions. Should we be tampering with the genetic code of life? Do we have the right to shape our future and even bring back extinct species? In addition to gene editing, we'll discuss the burgeoning field of synthetic biology. This is where scientists are not just editing genes, but creating life from scratch, designing organisms for specific purposes, whether it's creating microbes that can help detoxify the Martian atmosphere, or combating environmental issues here on Earth. This exciting field could one day change almost everything about how we view biology and evolution. And joining me today, we're extremely fortunate to have Professor Keith Fox, Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry at Southampton University and a noted expert in genetics and bioethics. Keith has co-authored the book Modifying Our Genes, Theology, Science and Playing God, which tackles the profound questions around gene editing from both a scientific and a theological perspective. We also welcome Sam McKee, a philosopher of science and cancer researcher, whose recent work includes exploring how synthetic biology could help humans live on Mars. Sam brings a philosophical perspective to the conversation about humanity's role in shaping life. Well, let's start with the science. And Keith, gene editing technologies, especially CRISPR, have revolutionized biology. Could you explain what CRISPR is?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your welcome. CRISPR is an acronym for clustered, and I can't remember what it sounds like, what it actually stands for now. It's a method by which we can very precisely go into a genome and alter a sequence. Correcting it if there's a mistake, and occasions adding new things into that. It's been developed in the past less than 10 years. It's applicable widely. It's very versatile and can be applied to any gene in almost any organism, and is relatively cheap to do compared with old-fashioned methods of genetic modification that require very complicated equipment and were very inaccurate in what they did.
I mean, I've heard it described as a molecular scissors that can cut DNA at specific locations.
Yes, essentially you can design the constituents of the scissors so that they cut at whatever position you like within a genome. So you can specify a particular 20-25 base pair sequence, and it will target that and cut it out.
And what possibilities does this range for the treatment of disease? Is it simply about identifying faulty genes, or what we might call faulty genes, or those that are associated with disease, and taking them out, or are there other possibilities as well?
There are all sorts of possibilities within that. I mean, one is certainly taking a faulty gene out, but more often you would want to actually correct a faulty gene, to take the faulty one out and replace it with a healthy one. There are possibilities of enhancing the gene, of including somehow incorporating new genetic material within the genome that might come from another species, that might come from, if you like, somebody, another human, for instance, or another of the same species that has a better version of the same gene.
And are we talking about things that you can now see we will be able to do in the future, or things that actually are directly applicable now?
A lot of these are directly applicable now. We can modify the genomes of bacteria, of viruses, of cells within cultures, so that human cells that are just simply growing in the same way as you grow a bacterium. We can modify those straightforwardly, modifying, if you like, a part of the genome that's going to be incorporated within a living human whole person is vastly more complicated. It has been done unethically and illegally by a Chinese scientist 6 or 7 years ago, of actually modifying a human embryo, in that case to make it so that it was partially resistant to HIV infection, modifying that and then implanting that embryo within a human uterus and bringing that to gestation.
Do you detect within the scientific community a concern that you are having to take, if you like, moral decisions in a vacuum, that the regulatory regimes or politicians and so on are too far behind this, that you're faced with moral decisions that you're taking in a way on behalf of humanity?
Absolutely. And generally when that modification of an embryo was performed, there was an outcry in the scientific community, is that we should not be doing this. And there was effectively a moratorium across the world in saying that this is something, it's all very well doing it on isolated cells, but to do it on anything that could lead through to a fully functional human being, a complete moratorium on it, and illegal in most countries.
What was the reaction within China itself? I mean, is this the outside world having a different view from China, or within China?
No, this was illegal in China. He broke all the ethical rules locally as well as internationally. It has to be said that some of the hesitation amongst scientists is not necessarily because it's overstepping the mark, but because of the elements of risk that are involved in that. At the moment, we don't really know what the consequences of doing that might be. You might modify one gene, but genes don't work in isolation, they work in networks. And then you might disrupt that network. You might accidentally modify something off target, another very important gene, and so it could have consequences, unknown consequences for the individual. So the question of risk has been very high up on the scientific ethical questions, rather than actually the question of is it morally or ethically permissible to do that.
Can I come across to you, Sam? We talked about gene editing, essentially, CRISPR. What about synthetic biology? How does this fit in? First of all, what is synthetic biology?
Thank you. So, I mean, CRISPR, which is clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats, for those of you who really want to know. There won't be a test on that, I'm sure, but yeah, it's quite a mouthful. CRISPR, all gene editing, reading, writing, and editing DNA comes under the umbrella of synthetic biology. But synthetic biology is basically using the tools of molecular biology to manipulate life in ways like improving health, improving the environment, growing the economy. It's basically manipulating organisms to deliver the outcomes that you desire. And in many ways, it's been going on for as long as humans have been here. I mean, think about the birth of agriculture. Humans have been, using or manipulating livestock and plants to produce our own desired ends. But as Keith has very well addressed, we've got tools now that we didn't have before. Tools that are so powerful and so effective and so quick and so accurate and can be used by, teenagers in high school labs, that don't cost very much at all, but are so prolific in their outcomes that really it's a whole new world.
It's a whole new world. In which part of the world? Because one of the concerns that obviously will arise here is who has access to this. You've talked about sixth forms, but sixth forms in Ethiopia, sixth forms in areas of the world, where we're desperate for hunger and so on. I mean, are we talking about a development of science which is contained within particular rich countries, or is there genuinely the possibility of this being utilized for the benefit of everybody?
Well, there's two parts to that question, really. Firstly, yes, I mean, for better or worse, if you've got the money, and we're only talking a few dollars here, you can order the genes that you want, you can order the bacteria that you want, you can order CRISPR-Cas9 and have it delivered to your high school lab in Ethiopia if you want. It is that easy. I mean, we've been talking mostly about big nation states like China, but my concern is more the nerd in his lab, who's just got a makeshift lab in his garage and orders the components and orders the genes and is playing in their garage. That's more my concern, over nations and labs and large institutions that are a lot more regulated, and there's a lot more pressure and protocol to follow.
Keith, is that your concern as well? Do you share that concern?
Yes, I do. I think we need to separate out between modifying bacteria, which could be very straightforward and could be done in any lab, and as Sam has said, is very cheap. If we were to do that, to take it to modifying a higher organism, such as a human, that then requires very complex technology and sophisticated machinery. So nobody's going to be modifying the human genome and making enhanced humans in their garage. But the process of modifying bacteria is fairly straightforward.
Or a virus, for that matter.
Yes.
Well, you're really cheering me up at this point. When I have to hear that, yes, carry on. Having just come through COVID, I start to get a bit bothered by it.
Yes, I don't want to sort of set anyone off on any conspiracy theory or anything like that. But no, I'm an optimist on this front. We've started kind of quite negatively, but I think for all people's excitement about artificial intelligence and what it can do, I think synthetic biology offers the most hope and the best prospects for a huge wealth of positive change that seemingly touches everywhere.
Which sort of change? What are your hopes? Could you be specifically about what do you think we will be able to achieve, which will be beneficial?
Well, firstly, I think there are genetic diseases that could go the way of the dodo and smallpox. Diseases like Huntington's disease, sickle cell, Tay-Sachs disease, diseases that are a very well-known single genetic change. You could theoretically get rid of them in a generation if you went at it. Then you've got cancer. I mean, that's my area of research is cancer. Cancer is a completely different ballgame. I'm very excited about where the world could be in terms of cancer in 10 years' time. For example, everything from CAR T cells, immunotherapy. These are the things we've been waiting for forever. They're the great equalizer. As long as the costs can come down, the promise of cancer therapy is totally different from what it was a decade ago. Then you have things like space. That's something I do some research on in terms of people staying long-term in low Earth orbit, but also on the moon and, yes, even theoretically on Mars. But then you've got ecofuels, the development of ecofuels. You've got de-extinction. I mean, that's fun, right? Isn't it? Bring back the woolly mammoth and the carrier pigeon.
Whoa! Keith, I just detect a little bit of reservation here.
I have more reservations than Sam over this. I think the potential for its good use are immense, for its use, particularly in medicine. I'm less optimistic about curing those genetic diseases. I think we could do that in individuals, but wiping them out internationally, it would be, I think, pretty much impossible. And some of them are sporadic occurring anyway, so they would only reoccur with time. Some of them I think is pipe dreaming, but I am actually worried about the misuse of those technologies.
Do you mind if we come, Keith, just to those? I'm trying to be optimistic at this stage of our discussion, if I may. I'm naturally, I think, half glass empty sort of person, so we've plenty. But I mean, just to, when we talk about de-extinction, this means, what does this mean? Does this mean that wherever we can find in the world genes of some extinct animal, we will be able to bring them back to life, and if necessary, we will see woolly mammoths roaming the earth? Or what are we talking about with de-extinction?
No, I think at best we could invent a new species that resembles the woolly mammoth rather than actually, because the DNA from those species of ages ago will be, it's degraded. It's not the sort of Jurassic Park. So we can sequence the Neanderthal genome. It's been done. You can sequence the woolly mammoth genome, but how are you then going to reconstruct that? And what is going to be the mother for this new woolly mammoth? And how is it going to deal with the learned behaviors that elephants and woolly mammoths would have? It's all very well having an African elephant, but that's not the environment in which a woolly mammoth ever lived. And how are those offspring going to learn how to behave as a woolly mammoth?
So, Sam, when you're talking about de-extinction, what do you mean?
Yes, it's woolly mammoth with an asterisk. With all respects to George Church, who I hugely admire. I mean, this isn't just
George Church is.
George Church is a very, very famous geneticist, prize winner, who is responsible for the efforts to bring back the woolly mammoth using gene editing technology and synthetic biology technology. So obviously there are no woolly mammoths left. So you basically need to create a woolly mammoth Indian. I think Indian elephant is the closest homologue to it, and it would be a hybrid. There are problems, like a woolly mammoth has 58 chromosomes, whereas I think elephants have got 56. So you would need to engineer cells, and then you would. This is theoretical, partly because it's not been done yet, and partly because this technology is still very new. So although what
would be the point of it, Sam?
Huge environmental point to it. We have serious climate issues. And woolly mammoths were walking over the Siberian steppes, tromping down the permafrost. Underneath that permafrost is enough methane to set off an incredible chain reaction of climate catastrophe. So it's hugely beneficial to bring back woolly mammoths and have them range over Siberia like they used to, because it will keep that permafrost down, keep it frozen. So it is, there's a rationale to it. It's not just, let's bring back a woolly mammoth.
I'm not sure Keith appreciates the rationale there. Keith, you've got.
I take the rationale, but I think it's rather a pipe dream, because you're not going to need one or two woolly mammoths. You're going to need a whole, I don't know what the right herds of woolly mammoths to do that. And as I say again, I think their learned behaviors. We have no means of teaching woolly mammoths what to do. The other thing that worries me over the de-extinction. It's if we can bring species back, then why should we bother about extinction now? And the whole environmental impetus for protecting species, why should we bother with that if we know that, well, if they happen to go extinct, it's not forever anymore, we can bring them back?
No, but it's not either or. It's both and. It's certainly never going to be a replacement strategy. But I'll give you another example. The American American chestnuts. They used to be absolutely prolific all throughout the east coast of the United States, and they've been driven almost completely away through deforestation, but also through blight by fungal blight. Now there's a project to reintroduce engineered American chestnuts up the east coast, but with a gene that's been modified to help fungal resistance. Now, I think environmentally that's extremely worthwhile. It was very important for bears, for squirrels, for caterpillars, which obviously hugely important for the ecosystems. That seems to me a very worthwhile effort. If you've got in your hand the power to do something like that, which we didn't 10 years ago, but we do now. I think that's a great example. Also, a lot of work that's going on with coral reefs and with corals, trying to help engineer them to defend them and protect their algae so that they can flourish a lot better. So, I mean, woolly mammoths are the poster child for it, but there's a lot of other good stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, Keith, do you see, put woolly mammoths aside from the positive nature, let's stay this first third of the program as positive as we can do. What are the other possibilities? You've talked about the, beginning to eradicate certain diseases, Huntington's disease, somebody mentioned, there's horrific things. Of other modifications, that puts de-extinction aside. What other things do you think that really in 20 to 30 years' time we may well have seen it being achieved by these processes of gene therapy and so on?
Yes, I mean, taking it further into the synthetic biology field, which is going beyond the simple modification of a single gene, but actually constructing new organisms and constructing new pathways. I think the benefits for medicine could be immense.
This is sort of engineering. To help me understand this, it's rather like, you're building a bridge from different parts. You create something that didn't exist before. And this is what we're talking about, essentially, of creating things.
Yes.
Which haven't previously existed.
Yes, and with the benefit of artificial intelligence as well. If you like, the old style genetic modification, change one gene at a time, is rather like taking a Lego model and saying, I want to replace a red brick with a yellow brick in the middle of that. But now we're at the stage of being able to engineer whole new organisms and saying, we will take a component from this one and a component from that one, a component from the other, and put them together to achieve something. And the power of biology, biochemistry, of enzymes to make things, is that we can now make pharmaceuticals that would have been very complicated to make by standard chemical synthesis that require high temperatures, high pressures, complex equipment, whereas to engineer pathways within bacteria that you just grow them in a broth at 37 degrees, and out comes your pharmaceutical. I mean, essentially, we've done that with insulin and other simple pharmaceuticals for many years now.
We've got about a couple of minutes before the end of this more optimistic section of our discussion, but I want to raise one question here with you, Sam, is whether or not, I'm not sure that capitalism was meant to result in so few people accumulating so much money. I don't think even Adam Smith would have envisaged this. Are we in a situation whereby, with these new technologies, developed, whichever countries are developing them at a particular time, presumably our most developed economies and so on, are capable of retaining all these from themselves and denying the rest of society these benefits? Is there a danger that what we're going to see is a very rich section or country, if you like, and then very poor ones in terms of these developments?
Good question. I think there's quite a lot of layers to it. I think there are a couple of things that need to be understood. Firstly, biotech will always make a lot of money because people want to stay alive. And that expertise is expensive. It's expensive to train. It's expensive to reproduce. But also, there's never going to be a shortage of demand for it. But in terms of your concern about the costs of where it will going, cancer immunotherapy is really, really expensive, but it's very, very new. And we need more people to get into the game and more research to go on it to bring the costs down. But CRISPR is really cheap to do. Imagine if drug discovery to medicine, imagine if that pipeline, instead of taking 5 years, it took 1 year because of the technological advances, not only in synthetic biology, but also the AI programs like AlphaFold and to really understand the structure of the macromolecule, the medicine you need. If drug discovery to medicine pipeline goes from 5 years to 1 year, then you're going to get it a lot quicker. And maybe that brings the cost down as well. So I think there are factors that people might not have considered. This technology is a lot cheaper, and if it can go a lot faster, then there's no reason why it should be so expensive or kept only in maybe a rich, affluent West.
Do you see that, Keith, that essentially, although development may be inevitably ahead, if you like, in what you refer to as the rich capitalist West, it will spread to the rest of society, or is there a real danger of a relatively small group of people or countries keeping a lot of this to themselves? You know, there are all these fanciful stories about creating a super race, you know, and so on.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, yes, I'm an optimist, but I think we're in a bit of a biological revolution at the moment. You know, we've got a lot of converging explosive technologies coming at the same time that interrelate to one another. You know, computational biology, genetic engineering, gene sequencing, cancer immunotherapy, you know, all these things, they feed into one another. And so you've got a bit of a snowball effect in biology at the moment. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be in biology. And revolutions are hard to predict. It's hard to predict how they'll play out. And so I'm hesitant to say that this is just going to be a rich person's game. I don't think we know what the effects are going to be. And it's something very new, something very exciting. I look forward to seeing how it plays out.
Keith, you discuss in your book the theological concerns about playing God when it comes to editing genes. It's an expression which is used very easily. What do you think playing God means?
I really don't like that phrase, and I almost regret having put it in the title of the book, because for a start, we're not playing. I think any of the scientists who do these sorts of things are being really serious and doing it generally for the benefit of society and for individuals within that society. Playing God, though, I suppose is a short phrase that says we've overstepped the mark, and there are things that only God should do, and that humans go there at their peril.
And some people would say that when you are altering the basic nature as we are made, if you like, that to alter our nature is something that humans should not do. It's one thing to modify even the environment or other things in some way, but once you're dealing with the human, what is it essential to be human, I think people suggest that is a point beyond which we should not go. Now, how do you as a Christian think through this?
So I'm not worried about changing human nature. Most of this is to do with dealing with diseases, with curing, and the Christian has always been at the forefront of medicine, caring for the vulnerable, looking after the diseased. So I really don't have a problem with that. If it comes to the point of where we are actually changing human nature, so if we were modifying people so that they might be more virtuous, they might be sort of nicer people, then I think that is going beyond.
Well, when you alter the human personality,
yes,
that's the line that you would draw, the difference between the body, if you like, and the diseases and all of those things, and deliberately setting out to create what? A more perfect, in some way, whatever that means, more perfect human being, a person who, you know, like they used to do in the past when they thought they could go in the brain and alter somebody in a way and deal with a whole range of things.
And there's not a clear dividing line between those. There's not a strict boundary between them. But I have no problem at all with trying to cure diseases and to give people healthier lives. But then there's that very fuzzy boundary as to what then starts to be an enhancement and what then really does start to change the way that we behave, the way that we think, the way that we interact with each other.
I mean, Sam, do you think that, from a philosophical perspective, do you think there are limits to human intervention in nature? Is there a point where we risk losing, well, something essential about humanity or nature by altering life? Where would you draw the line? The same place as Keith?
Well, let me put my philosophy hat on, I suppose. I see things that are fundamental to humanity and you know, what essentially makes us different from other mammals. Yeah, I lean on much more the mental character. So I'm not a dualist. If anything, I'm more of an idealist. I see sort of mind as a lot more fundamental. So I lean on consciousness, free will, responsibility, moral agency. I don't think these are they're certainly not physical characteristics alone, I certainly don't root all those things in genetics. So I see sort of what's fundamental to our character as spiritual and mental things. So yes, I do think there are limits to what we can do, even with the best pair of molecular scissors available.
And what about when you're trying to? Some people talk about trying to create human beings that live for 150, 200 years. Do you have any objection to that sort of thing? The creation of perfect physical species. There's a horrible Nazi overtone to that, isn't there? I mean, again, I'm not sure where one would draw the line here between eliminating or attempting to eliminate defects and disease and then trying to create something which is more perfect, as some would say, than God has created.
Well, I share Keith's revulsion to the playing God tag, and the question of where we draw the line is extremely fuzzy, and I don't think, especially given how new and powerful this technology is, I think it's got fuzzier, not clearer. But you talk about aging and things like that. Regenerative medicine is a huge area of synthetic biology, and I think it's very good. A lot of it relies on sort of restoring lost functions. So there's some very promising work in synthetic biology on restoring hearing, restoring eyesight.
On the question of age, I mean, I know that Abraham lived to something like 170, didn't he, or more like that. But I mean, we've normally talked about a normal lifespan. Okay, we extend it maybe from 70 years and 10 to 40. Aren't we talking about 150? I mean, but surely we're then talking about a handful of people that might be able to achieve that. Keith, you're nodding, or rather, you're nodding and doing this.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I am very cautious about the whole idea of extending life in that way. Is aging a disease, or is aging just a part of what it means to be human, and to be aware of our limited lifespan? I think that an infinite lifespan would be rather boring. And again, these sorts of things are going to be only applied to the wealthy, to those who can afford those sorts of technologies to extend their lifespan. And in a world where there is desperate inequality, even in terms of lifespan now, largely due to questions of health and nutrition and disease, rather than the natural 70 years and 10 or whatever it might be. My own view is that the money is better spent.
I agree. I think Keith's make a very, very good point here, and I share. Nick Spencer was on this show with me a couple of months ago, and talking about aging being disease. Aging is not a disease, but if we could make it a little less miserable, the Bible talks about the glory of a grey head and the wisdom of age and things like that. But if we could get rid of some of the suffering, or at least lessen some of the suffering, I suppose the difference here is, my starting point is, if we can remove some of the harm, lessen some of the harm, let's do it. Yes, the rich might benefit first. Yes, the West might get there first. But I do think it will trickle down to everyone eventually. But let's not hold back from healing. Let's not hold back from lessening harm until everything is perfect.
Will it trickle down? I mean, use that phrase, and I immediately think back to President Ronald Reagan in the United States and the whole belief he had about trickle-down economics. And actually what we've seen in the last 30 years, or since 35 years since it's been there, is, far from that happening, incomes in the United States among a certain working class area are basically fixed, not moving, and we've had some billionaires get richer and richer. Is that not a danger? That is precisely that trickle-down effect is an illusion, and we'll continue to have a group of extremely rich nations and extremely rich individuals which will capture this technology, and that their lives will. How do we ensure that humanity benefits as opposed to individual humans, Sam? This is the thing I don't know how.
Well, it's going to take a big effort. I actually do have faith in the genetics community. I think they collaborate pretty well, and they talk, and they are invested in these conversations. But I think we're talking at two different levels, because we're talking about the last 30 years, things have gone this way, or human nature, for as long as we've been here, we've been a certain way. But I'm just looking at the last 10 years, an explosion of convergent technological breakthrough, and us having to think now about what we do with it. There are huge unknowns, and a lot of what I've been talking about is theoretical, because this hasn't been done before, and a lot of what can be done, although it's practically possible, it's still in the theory stage. It's also a time of great scientific boom in terms of post-pandemic. Like during the pandemic, there was something like 5,000 journal articles a day being published on COVID. I mean, that's an extraordinary, unprecedented record level of scientific output. And we're operating now in the wake of that, where research seems to be faster. And it's more international, it's more collaborative. So I think I've got reasons to ground my optimism. I know I'm up against the beast of human nature, which maybe no one wins against that.
Yeah, but you're also the case that, I mean, what strikes me, for example, like COVID, now I may be wrong here, forgive me, is that you're absolutely, obviously you're right in terms of during COVID itself, there was an intensity of research, an amazing step forwards in many ways. But governments, and I think it's said of our own government in the United Kingdom, are not now, as a result of that experience, significantly altering our preparation for another COVID-like experience. Human nature tends to think, oh, well, that's gone. So, Keith, Keith, you don't share this.
I share the fascination and the wonder of what the science could achieve, but I'm much less pessimistic about the way in which this will be used across the board. There's big money in this.
Not less pessimistic. Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm less optimistic, more pessimistic. This will be largely controlled and implemented by big pharma. Now, I'm not critical of necessarily big pharma, but there are big multinational corporations involved in making money out of this. The other thing I'm worried about is this rather goes down the line of an ableist approach to humanity.
What, those who are disabled may be bothered that they be regarded as lesser human beings.
Absolutely. That I think is a real ethical and moral question on this.
What, so that those who have access to some of, sorry to keep interrupting you because I was trying to think it through, some of those people who have early access to some of these developments and enhancements that you're talking about, there is a danger then of looking at others who are not have not benefited in that way as being in some way inferior.
Yes, and the impetus for developing new drugs for treating those diseases as compared to eradicating them by genetics, there will be less impetus for doing that.
Because a large company, it's the nature of capitalism or any business really, is that you obviously want to make the biggest return possible, and that you concentrate, therefore, presumably on where you think that return will come from. And it may well come from the developed world, not the undeveloped world. So that argues for some sort of international, could you ever achieve an international consensus that these developments must not be restricted to those who can afford to pay for them?
Yes, it also raises the question of what is normal? What is a healthy human being? We're, I think, able to hear properly. Those in the deaf community, and deafness can be genetically inherited, some of those don't regard deafness as being a disability. It's just a different culture. There's a deaf culture. Are we going to have
experiences that we who can hear don't have? It's not that they are deprived, though they are in one way, but they are also enhanced in another.
Quite possibly, and we're defining what should be the social norm of what we expect, and society has great pressures in that way. A trivial example: look at the whole area of beauty. Who defines what beauty is? And yet we have the modification equivalent of all the cosmetic surgeries that are done to beautify ourselves against whose norms? Against society's norms. And I fear that we could have the equivalent of that within genetics.
Sam, could I ask about we're again, in a way, talking about humanity's ability to handle development in a way which will benefit the whole of society and not certain privileged parts of that. Obviously, as a Christian, you would presume, well, this gets politically, you presumably don't believe in, as the Vice President of the United States believes, in a number of circles, if you like. Your primary responsibility, your family, then, well, presumably as a Christian, you would think that everyone's equal and created equal in the sight of God, and that you have a responsible for everyone. Therefore, you have to be, as a Christian, an internationalist. If that's the case, and you're faced with the concerns that Keith has got, and unless the whole world changes and embraces Christianity, how do you persuade people about the moral goodness, if you like, of one approach and the dangers of the other? Because what you're talking here about is essentially changing the attitude of large sections of society towards other sections of society.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things that Keith said there. I actually think that the first people to really reap the benefits of CRISPR will be people who need enhanced medicine. So I think the people who will benefit first will be those afflicted with disease and suffering, and I think that will only be a net positive as it eventually gets around. My concerns more are with the cosmetic side of things, which Keith brought up. So people who want to edit their babies, to be taller, faster, stronger, smarter, more resistant to disease. Yeah, that's where my concerns really lie. Is when it becomes the playground of the rich, and you end up creating a genetic upper class as a result of that. So that's sort of my concern.
And there's no, United Nations can't do this. There's no international organization that can do this. There are international organizations of scientists and other things that can try and influence things. But as we are seeing in some societies now, if there's sufficient money, you can buy the scientists, or some of them, and you buy the development and so on. I can't see the structures that exist in the world that would help achieve what you and I think both Keith wish to achieve, to ensure that somebody doesn't buy the best societies possible and try to create the perfect child for themselves or whatever.
Actually, when it comes to genetics, collaboration, law, internationalism, it does depend a lot where you live. If you live in California, there are CRISPR biotech startups where you can edit your IVF cells. But in other states, even within the US, you can't. Now, that's not to stop you just upping sticks and moving to California, doing it, and then moving back. So I don't know how much of a problem that is. But there are, again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but it's a new era.
Again, Keith, I can come back to you on this point. It's a new era, and you have a sense in which most of us are scrambling to understand and to catch up. I'm not sure you can see in any political party or in government that they're really on top of a lot of this. And again, is this a situation where scientists like yourself are dangerously ahead of the public debate, or that there isn't even a proper yet public debate? I mean, it's interesting that the debate on the consent dying debate. It's interesting about that to me, because that started off fairly clear cut, if you like, with a number of people passionately involved, but partly because of the length of the debate, much wider considerations have been brought into bear, and people have been made to think through issues that they would not normally have thought about. And so by the very process of proposing this piece of legislation, it's enabled that wider debate. When we come to the issues we're talking about, I'm not aware, and I'm pretty ignorant about these things, of that wider debate. Is there one?
I don't think there is that wider debate in society. I think there is amongst some of the scientists who question as to where we're going and are slightly hesitant about that. But in wider society, I don't think there is. And even if there was international agreement on that, that itself might be quite difficult. I think there always will be the risk of what we might call genetic tourism, go and find another country that will do it, or go and find the rogue scientist. I mean, the vast majority of scientists behave very ethically and morally and are good people. But there's always the one person who would anything to have their name known. What is it said? Better to be known for murder than not to be known at all. And they will do it.
But do you see, I mean, let's take this briefly, the situation of abortion. People are very clear, for example, of the Roman Catholic Church's position on this and on life issues. Whether you agree with it or not, that the Church has been outspoken about it, it's very clear. I'm not aware of such clarity from the Christian organizations in regard to genetic engineering and to other areas. I mean, Sam, are you aware of that level of debate and decisiveness and moral guidance being issued to people of faith?
No, I agree with Keith. The debate for society hasn't happened yet. There's just been discussions amongst scientists, with some people invited into it. But as we mentioned earlier, there's a huge gap between the technology and the public understanding of it. But I think there's also a challenge here for the church, in that I think there are levels of difficulty in science and religion right now, in that there's a big gap between the science and the science communicators, and then there's a big gap between the science communicators and the theologians and the clergy and the philosophers of religion and those sorts. And that gap is growing as the technology is moving faster. I think Christians have been very wrapped up in things like AI and have maybe missed the boat of what's happening in biology. That's my opinion. But there's one other thing I'd want to add here is I think we need more Christian futurists. I think we need more Christians who are invested in future technology and thinking about it and engaging with it as people who have a feet perhaps in the science camp, but also the theology camp. I mean, I'm quite biased, but you go back to the days of the Royal Society, and all of those at the forefront of scientific development and health were Christians, and we've ceded a lot of that ground. We could do with some more Christian futurists who are really reckoning with the future and where it's going, both with hope and excitement in divine promise and enthusiasm to make life better for the fellow man and woman, but also with care to make sure that things don't go off the rails ethically.
Well, I think where there has been discussion, there is a diversity of views across the spectrum of Christians. For those who say any modification of the human genome is inherently wrong, for those who would say, well, for the benefit of the individual, for cure and disease, it's fine, or those who want to see an enhanced society. So there is already a diversity of that, but we need a better conversation of what's going on. Too often, I think Christians have not thought futuristically, to pick up Sam's phrase, and that I think there is a way in which we should be thinking of what might be possible in the future and thinking of the ethical implications of that before it happens. Too often we played ethical catch-up afterwards, and now I think we should be dreaming. This is what might be possible. This is what is fantastic. Thank God for the science, the gift he's given us. And this would be really great for society. And this is where we need to be very cautious, and maybe other areas where we say, no, we're not going there.
Yeah, can I just add there? I would love to see more Christian scientists with a voice saying, look at how life can get better. I think a lot of churches are, I'm generalizing here and I'm sorry for it, but are very much, the world's terrible, the world's coming to an end, Christ will come back in 5 minutes. Whereas so many of the humanists and the atheists have sort of taken the ground of, look, we can make the world better, the world's getting better. And what you're left with sometimes is the optics of the Christians and the church saying, hang on a second, no, let's not do this, let's slow down. And it would be a shame if the next great leap of medicine, for example, you had all the Christians saying, no, come on, hang back, be careful, let's think about this. And you had all the non-religious futurists saying, the world is going to get better, we can do something about it, look at this new technology, it's not a good look. And so I'd hate for that to be that way.
Are they? I mean, I remember when I'm now revealing my age, I suppose. The Archbishop of York, John Hapgood, was an extraordinary figure because he was there at the pinnacle of the church, say 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And he was also on top of the scientific debate. And he was able to, in the House of Lords and elsewhere, was able to speak in a language which communicated and spoke to, as it were, across the way. And you felt there's somebody who is both on top of the science and also seriously thought through the Christian implications of this. Can you nominate, Keith? I can't, apart from yourself, of course, I can't think of many people in the leadership of the church now who combine these two things.
There are those within the church who are able to talk scientifically. David Wilkinson is an extremely good example of that at Durham. But leadership of the church generally comes from people with a humanities background. There's nothing wrong with that, but we don't have enough scientists within the church.
That's true of journalism too, I'm afraid. Yeah, it is.
Yes, we don't have enough scientists who have gone into the church and can speak to these issues. It's not part of the curriculum in most theological colleges. And yet, I mean, I've said about this for many, many years, a significant proportion of the peoples that the church ministers to actually have a scientific background. Whether it's A-level biology or a PhD in molecular biology, the congregations often are not represented by the leadership in terms of their academic skills. Of course, and that's a great shame.
And some people are still locked in this absurd idea that it's science versus God and haven't caught up.
Absolutely.
That's absurd. Sam, just a concluding remark for you at this section.
Yes, I find this personally tremendously frustrating. I mean, I have a science degree, a science master's, doing science PhD, but I also have a theology degree and a theology master's and a humanities PhD. And I've met so many extraordinary Christians who are scientists. Dennis Alexander, a good friend of both of ours, was said to me a few months ago that on the physics faculty at Oxford University, there are 8 church-going Christians. 8 church-going Christians on the physics faculty of Oxford University. And I bet the church hasn't heard of any of them. And that's such a waste. That's such a loss. I mean, I can't for the life of me understand that. Christians in Science in Britain is a tremendous organization. And when you go to Christians in Science meetings, you're surrounded by incredible scientists from Oxford, Cambridge, all over the world, working at world-class institutions or research industry. And I just think we've got such an extraordinary gift here, but the church doesn't really know what it has under its nose. I find that very frustrating.
Can I exaggerate a little bit on what you've just said? I don't think there's just 8 academic physicists. I think there are 8 professorial academics.
Yes, sorry, as in professors or assistant professors or associate professors.
We're wrapping up our discussion on the power and responsibility that comes with genetic engineering and synthetic biology, and we concluded the previous part of our conversation with the need of the church, really, and the churches to be aware of the talent that exists within the universities and elsewhere, and the need to communicate and bring, if you like, the theology up to date almost with the scientific development that we're talking about. But is that we've talked in perhaps a slightly narrowly English or British way here? Do you think that's true elsewhere in the world, or is it people often say about the Brits, having been once leading engineering, industrial revolution or whatever, we have neglected science? Do you think that's a specific British phenomenon, or do you think in looking at theologians worldwide, they are more able to connect science with theology? Sam?
I'm biased, but I do think we have it pretty good here in Britain. I think we have it a lot better than other countries, is my fairly limited observation. But I think in Britain we've got a real wealth. Even just when you look at the individuals within Christians in Science or the Faraday Institute in Cambridge, we do have a wealth. time for me to be the pessimist, perhaps. Perhaps our church in the UK just hasn't figured out how to use it best yet.
Keith, you were nodding away.
Yes, I mean, I'm agreeing with Sam. I think actually we're very privileged in this country to have senior scientists who are Christians and are not afraid of saying things and entering into the debate in a way in which many other countries there is much more of a conflict attitude between science and faith.
Well, when we're looking at some of the reservations and some of the concerns that are around about this, we've discussed, whether it's morally right to, as it were, tamper with nature and the way in which we do it. We've talked about that controversial, the statement Keith doesn't like, the expression Keith doesn't like, is one playing God when creating new life. But what about the security aspects of this, which are not so much moral, I suppose, they're just terrifying in a way? What happens if a synthetic organism accidentally escapes? Sam, is this just something you have to think about all the time, whatever you're doing, or are there specific worries with this sort of development that we're talking about, of a synthetic organism accidentally escaping?
I think there's two answers to that. I'll give you the worst one first. When you're dealing with antimicrobial resistance, it has the prospect of being one of the biggest challenges to humanity going forward, as antibiotics become less and less effective. If we can't win the arms race against microorganisms, you could very well see us going back to the days of having to chop off limbs because of bacterial infections, and no one wants that. And so part of the proactive attempt to combat that is not only developing and engineering new antimicrobials, which is great, but is looking at new strains of bacteria and viruses that could potentially make the leap into humans and cause suffering and death, and then trying to counteract that by developing the treatments to them ahead of time. But the problem with that is, what if one escapes and you're not ready? I think we can quite easily imagine what that would look like.
Is this ever any different, though, from just the worry about whether viruses escape? I mean, in other words, it's a problem we have now. It's a problem that we'll have in the future. It's not new in that sense.
No, it is, because it's directed by us deliberately.
Keith?
I have two views on this. Well, one is, I think the responsible companies that are making, using bacteria and maybe some viruses for benefit, often have within those, the organisms are modified in such a way, they're so focused on making the biologic that we need, that they actually are useless outside of that environment. They require us to be feeding them with certain nutrients, and if they're released, then they don't stand any chance at all. I am, though, concerned about some areas of research where there could be escapes. The flu, influenza. What makes influenza, some strains of that, very virulent? And there is very good research working out what are those virulent factors. How can we manufacture, for the purpose of basic research, new influenza viruses that are more virulent, to better understand the basic biology of it? Now, if one of those escaped, we'd have a problem. The other thing is that actually nowadays some of this technology is driven by the ease with which we can synthesize DNA and we can assemble it together. I don't think it would be a great task to remake the smallpox genome.
I mean, that's publicly available knowledge, isn't it? I mean, you can look up the smallpox genome, and someone could conjure it. Now, if someone was doing a search for the smallpox genome and then ordered the lab equipment, I think security forces would be at their front door very, very quickly. So, I'll assuage people's fears a little bit, but theoretically, it's certainly possible.
A possibility of bioterrorism within that.
I was going to raise that question about that. I mean, is it just? I mean, bioterrorism is here anyway. You've got to watch out for it. Or, what if an individual misuses synthetic biology and creates a harmful entity, a biological weapon. I mean, and we're just saying that's a constant problem now, will be in the future. It's not significantly different, Keith.
I think it always will be a problem. Granted that we've said that some of these technologies are not expensive. They don't require vast technical pieces of equipment. I think it's always a problem. I think that the commercial companies that you can buy synthetic DNA from, I think they would quickly be alerted if you were trying to resynthesize the smallpox genome. But actually, the apparatus for making synthetic DNA is itself not that expensive. I mean, you might be talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, but if you're a well-invested terrorist, there's all sorts of possibilities that would not be picked up. And the possibilities of that are awful, but I'm an optimist that it won't happen, but we need to be vigilant.
Yeah, I agree. Sleep well at night.
I'm trying to. I'm not sure I will tonight, but I'll try to.
It's theoretically possible, but it's extremely unlikely.
And what about the danger? Again, I think we've referred to it earlier, but just to clear it up, I mean, could you have a patent system which allows patents on living organisms? You know, supposing someone, somebody creates HIV-resistant genes in humans, but patents it and restricts it. Therefore, is that possible? Or is that again me just inventing something which is a worry, Keith?
Oh gosh, I'm not an expert on this, but the whole area of patenting and biology is a minefield. Patenting a natural gene is, I know, not possible. But whether you can patent a modified gene or a new organism or a modified organism, I think is a patenting legal minefield. I don't have enough expertise to be able to begin to address that.
Well, this was brutal with CRISPR, wasn't it? You had full-on, very expensive, very bloody legal warfare between University of California and which one is what was the other one on the East Coast over the CRISPR? It was brutal because one was for prokaryotes and one was for eukaryotes, and they said, well, these are the same. You know, the technology is the same, the technique is the same. So why are we distinguishing? I know you're using one in one type of organism and one in another, but it's the same. And it was brutal. I hope people learn from that. I would say I do remember Myriad, the biotech company, got in some hot water for trying to patent a gene related to breast cancer treatment. And it was a point of discussion in the genetics community of, wait a minute, like you've now put a financial blockage in the way of really important health research for breast cancer. And so it was not a good optic. And I may be wrong, but I think that was sort of a learning point. It set a precedent, basically, that it's not good to do this. When it comes to health, we don't want to patent various genetic procedures or genes themselves, and that would put a financial block in the way of human health research.
Can I ask you one other question, which someone mentioned to me, which was, as we look at the problems of space exploration, we seem to run up against some basic problems with human beings as they are now, enabled to because of distance and things like that. Would you have any moral objections to people trying to develop human beings so that they could, or some human beings, so that they could explore space in that sense, almost create? I mean, I don't know what we're talking fantasy. You shake your head, Keith. Do you think I'm talking fantasy time here?
It's theoretically possible, but I don't think we should do it because we end up treating humans as commodities for particular ends rather than as individuals made in the image of God. We would be breeding spacemen, if you like, and I think that is ethically unacceptable.
But Sam, could we imagine Elon Musk being interested in this issue? Do you think?
So I've a disclaimer, I'm a little biased on this because I've had the pleasure of working with Martin Rees quite a bit, and he's very much a futurist with the view that for humans to live long term on the moon and Mars and beyond, you will have to use gene editing to lessen the suffering and develop better capabilities to survive in such a harsh atmosphere, such a harsh environment.
I mean, presuming it's technically possible, are there moral, ethical concerns about that? It sounds as if you're starting to create a super race.
Gosh, I'm going to sound like a monster, aren't I? I just sort of see it as the future, really. That I think it's part of our destiny to live on the moon and Mars, and people will inevitably be different there as the decades and the centuries go on. And if you can lessen the suffering by using genetic engineering to help you cope with the fierce temperature differences, the atmosphere differences, the radiation differences, then that would just be part of the medical process for enabling us to do that. And I don't think it's a situation where you're setting out to create a Martian or setting out to create lunar people. I just see it as part of the technology of helping us to live somewhere else that would, over time, make differences that would be significant. But I don't know that I see that as evil.
I beg to differ on that, because I think is, if you like, making a human so that they could live in hostile environments such as Mars or the moon. Is that any different from making a human with enhanced athletic ability? Because again, we're treating humans and children. These are, they're going to have to be born and grow and develop, and we're treating them as commodities rather than as individuals, people with a fixed end and purpose in life, rather than the open-ended future possibilities that each of us have when we're born, and which we hope for our children.
Well, I think one is cosmetic and the other one is about lessening suffering. So I do think that is the process is the same, certainly, but I think they're different in that sense. If you have people who want to live on Mars, and there will be, I mean, as soon as starships can take people there will be people who sign up to live on Mars by the hundreds and the thousands, and it's going to be difficult. But if that's what they really want, they want to go start a new civilization out there, then they will need different kind of medical help.
But I suspect it won't be the people themselves, it will be their progeny that will be living on Mars, because the modifications that have to be made are so great. You can't do it to a fully formed human being. It could only be done on an embryo that would subsequently develop. And that, to my mind, is dealing with future generations in a way that is not correct.
Yes, I mean, we're talking about the deep realms of theoretical biology here. I mean, there's so much that would need to be known before you could even do that. But I will add the caveat, though: Earth is going to become a harder atmosphere to live in. I mean, as climate goes on, there are people who live in parts of the world right now, some of the distant islands, some of the more desert regions, where the Earth is going to become harder and harder and harder. People are going to be living in places on this planet that are going to be more and more difficult to live in. So I don't think we should sort of put the lid on it right now, but rather hold it open, not hold it too loosely, but hold it open as people could suffer on Earth as well with how climate changes over the decades.
I would want to say our money should be better invested in combating the effects of climate here on Earth and preventing those, and maybe reversing some of those climate changes that have already happened.
I agree with that.
That is the moral Christian imperative, is to look after the world that we've been put in.
That if you're not careful, you have a group of extremely rich people who will be able to escape the Earth in that sense. But then if also you're modifying them, if they were to return, they would return as enhanced human beings with greater power over the rest of humanity.
Well,
what are we going into here?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think they would return better suited to Mars than to Earth. which could be a disadvantage. Now, I completely agree with what Keith said. Our money should go into preventing climate disaster, most certainly. But then, if you want to combat climate disaster, you better get using some synthetic biology, because synthetic biology is one of the best weapons we have for engineering environmental change, both in terms of manipulating microorganisms to help remove some of the greenhouse gases and help put out some of the better ones, to purifying areas that have absolutely been toxified. It's synthetic biology is our best weapon. Keith doesn't disagree with that, I'm sure. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Some people listening to this, though, would wonder how you remain Christians. How you've talked earlier, Sam, about free will and so on, and leaving a space. How do you? Why is your Christian faith relevant to what you do?
Great question. I think my answers will be much the same as Keith's, in that I feel my purpose in science very much as a deep call from God. I think it's a natural outworking of my faith. Yeah, I take great consolation in reading Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle and Johannes Kepler, and I'm very, very inspired by them.
Yeah, fellow Christians.
Yes. I just see scientific research for the common good of humanity and for the betterment of the world is very much a calling and a natural outworking of faith. I think it's a deeply Christian thing to do. In terms of how it's relevant, I think when you're working on the frontier, like a lot of biology is right now, it's where you should be as a Christian. I would like to see more Christians working on the frontiers of biology. I think, ethically, I know some people may have taken issue with some of the things I've said, but ethically, it's a place where Christians should be. I'm not advocating for being completely cavalier with synthetic biology, but I'm advocating for being there. And I think a Christian should be there.
And I think it's important for us to see science as a gift from God, to understand the world that he has made, and to develop technologies for being able to understand that and to use that for the improvement of people, for looking after the vulnerable, for dealing with health, for all those sorts of things. The probing of the science as a Christian, I thoroughly endorse. That's part of our Christian mandate for looking after the world, for caring for what God has put us amongst. And the question, and it's a big one, is to how do we then apply the science? Understanding how the world works is fascinating, and it's fascinated me for all of my career. But then there is then the leap between the fundamental science and the technological applications, and that's why I think I'm not against them, but we need to be. I think I'd be far more cautious than Sam.
And are you happy still to use expressions like, well, we talked about free will, but about the soul and the spirit? Or have we got an outdated, do you as a scientist think in some way we have some outdated language?
Yes, I think we do. I am not a dualist in that sense. I'm not of the opinion that we are spiritual beings that somehow inhabit a physical body. Our embodiment is actually part of what it means to be a person. And I think that's very, very important. But yet there is more to being a human than just chemistry and physics and biology. That there is that deeper aspect to us, which call it spiritual, if you like. But I wouldn't want to separate it actually from the very physical nature that we have. I can see Sam's nodding.
Is that your view, Sam? Because a lot of people would say that the body is something that we simply inhabit, as it were. Then our essence, or however you define it, is somehow separate, and we leave the body behind because it's related to the earth and to heaven, or wherever we go, or whatever there is. There's an essence of us which is somehow inhabits the body but is not of it. And I think what Keith is saying, that you can't make that separation. Do you share that?
I'm with Sir Arthur Eddington on this one. Arthur Eddington, in 10 years after the theory of relativity has been proven and then written about and circulated to the world. Arthur Eddington, in his book The Nature of the Physical World, is asked what all this means in a decade where relativity has been discovered, the Big Bang cosmology has been discovered, and then quantum physics has been discovered. People are confused as to what the nature of the world really is. And Arthur Eddington says, I've come to the conclusion that the nature of ultimate reality is spiritual. People were expecting a very, very different answer. All this science, all this breakthrough, what does this tell us about who we are, about what we're made of, about what reality really is? He says it's quite simple, really. The nature of ultimate reality is spiritual. And I agree with him. I don't think these great advances in biology change that. And when I think about who I am and what reality really is, I see it as spirit first.
When I had coming to the end of this discussion, I sometimes think that, we are born pessimists or optimists. And perhaps one of you is more optimistic than the other. But I detect with both of you an excitement about these changes and about the potential, but also a belief that there's a great danger that not just Christians or people of faith, but everybody needs to catch up. And it goes back to this fundamental problem, don't we find in our educational system and elsewhere, is that most of us, and me in particular, I suppose, are undereducated in scientific terms. That just as you can say that there's a danger that people are undereducated in terms of faith and religion and don't understand, why we are, how we are become what we are, and who need to understand that. They don't, it's somehow irrelevant, we're progressing, whatever. There's that same undereducation of science and this desperate gap that the conversation we're having now, and I'm trying to keep up with, is one that actually most people will not have. Most parliaments will not have. How do you remedy this? What we're talking for is a public dialogue about what's happening, which is not taking place. How do you start that dialogue, Sam? How do you get it going so that people like yourself and Keith and others who are at the cutting edge are not left almost alone to make some of the most complex moral and ethical decisions I've ever heard of?
Well, it's unfortunate that these incredible booms and breakthroughs in biology are coming at a time where public trust in science is quite low after the pandemic. And also, I think in general, a trust of authority is quite low. We're sort of in this strange philosophical waters right now where people's ultimate authority is themselves and what they think and what their truth is. And I don't really get it. I think science and expertise, scientific expertise needs to come back to the fore in terms of people's trust and respect. And that might have to be earned, but I mean, gosh, look at what is happening in biology right now. The promise of genetic medicine and all of that is so great that it's unfortunate timing. But as we said earlier, the church needs to do better on this as well, I think. You've got churches all across the country that are full of scientists who are doing life-changing work, driving humanity forward, working on the frontiers, trying to make life better for your common man, and they are kind of anonymous and not really used in their services and in their congregations. It's very, very strange. I don't have an answer to that. I wish I did.
But you share the view that, in a sense, you need to advertise yourself a bit more.
Yes, and I'd share a lot of what Sam has just said. I have been involved in Christians in Science and the Faraday Institute for many years in different positions within that. And one thing, there are those Christians who are scientists that Sam has talked about, but sometimes they actually live in two different worlds, so that their Christian faith is manifest at the weekend and in good works that they do in the evenings, etc. But they don't actually integrate the science and the Christian faith together. And that is one thing that I've, in my very small way, have tried over the years to try to get scientists who are Christians to see what does it mean to be a Christian who is a scientist. Not that I'm a Christian one moment and a scientist the other. Not that to say that those are in conflict, but actually what does it mean to integrate those? And I don't actually think it's just scientists. I think it's almost any career. You get Christians who are lawyers. How do we integrate those two together? Christians who are in the media and the arts, how do they express their Christian faith within those sorts of things? I think too often the church has seen expressions of Christian faith as to what happens on a Sunday, or maybe in good works that are done outside of the work environment, but finding ways to get people to integrate faith and work.
Oh, I'd like to just add, I think the problem is particularly acute for biologists. I think physicists have a much easier ride of things. If a physicist wants to talk in church, there's like, oh, great, let's do it. I hope so anyway. If a biologist wants to talk in church, there's a lot more concern about offense and kicking up a storm. I have creationists telling me I'm going to hell every year for my position as a biologist, which is a shame. I wish that didn't happen. I also have flat earthers telling me I'm a monster all the time as well. So
I once led a small discussion amongst student age in a Christians in Science meeting, and I asked them what was the greatest challenge to their faith. And I expected them, it's in the days of the new atheists, to say things like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, all those sorts of people. And actually they came back and said, my church. Because as soon as they said, I'm a biologist, or I'm involved in genetic modification of plants, or whatever it might be, immediately the shutters were down. You've got horns, and you're not behaving ethically. So re-educating the church sometimes. I mean, there are plenty of churches that do honour scientists.
But I must say that I recognise that. I very much do recognise that. Look, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thanks to my guests, Professor Keith Fox and Sam McKee, for this. Well, it certainly was thought-provoking. I found it a bit inspiring. So thank you very much indeed. And clarifying, which it certainly was. Join us next time as we continue exploring life's big questions on Premier Unbelievable. Do tell us what you think. You can email us on unbelievable@premier.org.uk or comment on Instagram @PremierUnbelievable. And we'd love to hear what you think about the ethical implications of gene editing and synthetic biology. Thank you very much for listening.